Hey guys, welcome back to another unit build video. This time we'll be looking to one of the newly released units, Sothe, and I'll go over the best builds you can have on him. One of these builds will take advantage of his high attack using heavy blade, and the other will focus on his weapon's debuffing and buffing potential. Okay, so starting off from looking at his stat distribution, he has a really good neutral base attack at 36, which ranks him first in having the highest attack among all currently released dagger units. His speed is decent with a neutral base of 33, but will leave him struggling when trying to double some of the faster meta units. His HP is pretty high considering his class and will definitely help him survive. Finally, his resistance and defense is decent and pretty standard for most dagger units. So looking to his default kit, Sothe gets some really good skills right off the bat. Starting with his weapon, Peshkats, it has the ability to debuff all stats by 4 on the enemy that Sothe attacks and every other surrounding enemy units within 2 spaces. Then he is able to buff all of his stats by 4 and buff all of his allies' stats by 4 that are within 2 spaces from him after combat. This weapon is really strong and essentially allows each of your units to do 8 additional damage to the enemy and receive 8 less damage. It is also very important to note that the debuff and buff to the foes and allies respectively will occur even if Sothe defeats the enemy that he engages on. Moving on, for his special he gets Glimmer. It's a good special that will help him increase his damage output. For units with high attack, Glimmer is better than Moonbow most of the time, so Sothe's special doesn't have to be changed. Next on the list, Sothe comes with one of the strongest offensive A skill, Life and Death. By trading in 5 defense and 5 resistance, Life and Death grants a unit 5 more attack and speed. This skill works really well with Sothe's kit. It allows him to increase his already high attack even higher and gives him much more needed speed that he was originally lacking. The drop in defense and resistance is sort of negligible because his weapon makes up for it by buffing him and debuffing his foes. Additionally, with the added speed, it will help him prevent from being doubled and therefore increasing his survivability even higher. Finally, Sothe comes with one of the strongest offensive spurs in the game, Spur Attack and Speed. This allows adjacent allies to gain +3 attack and speed during combat, which is really amazing for any glass cannon allies. So moving on to the first build I have for you guys today, it will be his Heavy Blade set. With Sothe's really high attack, proccing Heavy Blade would be very easy for him and allow him to use his specials much sooner and more often. So starting off, I will keep Peshkats as his weapon because it has the highest attack among all daggers. Using a high attack dagger will help proc Heavy Blade more often, and Peshkats' built-in utility makes it overall a good choice. For the A skill, I feel that Life and Death will be the best option to run. The additional attack over Fury will help proc Heavy Blade, and the additional speed will help prevent him from being doubled. While Fury does give him more bulk, Life and Death will help the set more unless your Sothe is highly merged. However, Fury is still a viable alternative. Next, Vantage will be the preferred B skill for Sothe because first, Sothe is not fast enough to run Desperation, and second, it will help him kill on the enemy phase. How it works is that even with Life and Death, with Sothe's decent HP, he should be able to survive at least 1 hit from the enemy, which will get him into Vantage range when that happens. Then, he should be able to one-shot ranged units with low defense on the enemy phase, especially if he's able to debuff the enemies during that player's turn. In addition, Vantage helps the interaction between his special's cooldown and Heavy Blade, so this leads into my choice of special, Miracle. Miracle is really good in Sothe's set since it pairs well with Heavy Blade. For example, if you engage on a ranged enemy and couldn't kill him, you would hit the enemy and reduce Miracle's cooldown from 5 to 3. The enemy retaliates and brings the cooldown to 2. Then when the enemy re-engages on you, your Vantage procs allows you to attack first and most likely kill them, and bring the cooldown Miracle from 2 to 0, and now you can survive an additional hit from the enemy. This works with melee enemies as well, assuming that they won't W you and you have higher attack than them. This is why Peshkats is important, because it will help boost your stats and lower the enemy stats after combat, making Sothe even stronger when paired with a Dancer. Moonbow and Glimmer are both viable alternates as well if you're aiming to be more damage based, because you only need to hit enemies once for Moonbow or Glimmer to go from a cooldown of 2 to 0. Then if you have Vantage activated, you can attack first with a guaranteed special proc. Oh, and before we continue, here's an optimal Quick and Post Mochi build for Sothe if anyone was interested in running. With Quick and Post and the Mochi, you have a turn 1 special ready right from the start before any combat if you're running Glimmer or Moonbow, which is basically the purpose of the build. It's really strong, however, it's really difficult to do this build since the Mochi weapon is locked under a 5-star seasonal unit. But for those who are interested, here you go. Anyways, moving on to Ivy's, for your boon, plus attack is the best because it helps guarantee the Heavy Blade procs. Plus speed is still really strong because it helps you double and proc your special faster and gives you options to run Desperation in your build. Any other boon is alright, just not that helpful in assisting his Heavy Blade set, but with Sothe's innate high attack and with Life and Death, you can still get away with it. For his Bane, minus resistance and minus defense is most optimal because he doesn't really aim to tank more than 1 hit. The reason minus HP is not as optimal is because A minus HP Sothe loses 4 HP, while minus defense and minus res only loses 3 stat points. Having minus HP forces you to lose an extra stat point, hurting Sothe's total BST. However, that doesn't really matter outside arena and maybe 1 or 2 really close fights. Finally, for your Bane, minus attack and minus speed really hurts the build overall and causes you to lose certain matchup. I got minus attack Sothe for example, and I'm still crying. Moving on to the next build I have for you guys is a Windsweep build. We'll focus on allowing Sothe to apply his buffs and debuffs safely and still apply a large amount of damage. So the build itself is pretty self-explanatory. You want to run Pesh Cats for the debuffing and buffing ability that it comes with, and to apply those stats safely, we can run Windsweep or Water Sweep. For those who don't know, the sweep skills prevent the users from doubling, however, in return it prevents certain weapon types of units, which depend on which sweep skill you have, from counterattacking as long as you have 1 or more speed than they do. For Water Sweep, it prevents mages from counterattacking, and for Windsweep, it prevents every weapon type from counterattacking aside from mages and Dragonstone units. So I just chose Windsweep because it allows Sothe to attack into a wider variety of units safely and prevents distant counter units from attacking him back. For your seal, running Phantom Speed is an absolute must. It allows you to add 10 to your speed stat whenever you have to compare speed with another unit for your skills. So using the stats I have on the left for example, when Sothe attacks a unit that has a speed of 45, in combat Sothe's speed is way lower at 38. But when his skill Windsweep compares his speed stat with the enemy, it will add 10 more speed, giving him 48 speed. This means with Phantom Speed, Sothe is able to apply Windsweep even though he has way lower speed than his opponent. For his A skill, Life and Death is preferred because he's mostly a player-faced unit. Since most of his opponent won't be counterattacking back, the drop in defense from Life and Death doesn't mean much. In addition, the additional attack will help his damage output and the additional speed will definitely help in proccing Windsweep. Fury can be ran as a viable alternative if you plan on allowing Sothe to tank a few more hits or 2, which is completely fine too, since the enemy is attacking him will most likely be debuffed when you attacked him during the player phase. For IVs, the most optimal is either plus attack or plus speed. I chose plus attack in this build because I felt that Phantom Speed would boost Sothe's speed high enough in which he wouldn't need the extra speed to proc Windsweep, so he could put more points in his attack to deal more damage. However, plus speed would definitely be better to guaranteed Windsweep every time. However, with this build, any boot could work because you don't actually need the extra attack or speed. It just helps guarantee the Windsweep proc, or just helps Sothe win more. For your Banes, the reasons were about the same as the previous build. Minus resistance and minus defense is preferred because Sothe wouldn't need them in combat since the enemy shouldn't be counterattacking. Minus HP is okay, but causes Sothe to lose overall BST, and minus attack and minus speed just makes you want to cry, but don't let that deter you from building him or foddering him away for his skill inheritance. Once again, thanks guys for watching this video, hopefully it was insightful. I would appreciate any tips or comments to be left in the comment section below so I can read them later, or what you want to see in the next video. Thank you!